I still remember that day like it was yesterday. The smell of fresh coffee brewing in our kitchen, the sound of my parents' hushed voices, and those words that cut through me like a knife. Rebecca will never amount to what Jason could have been. Had been 6 months since we lost my brother. Jason was the golden child, math genius, science whiz, the kid everyone in our boring Midwest town pointed to as going places. Then came the accident on Route 16 and everything fell apart. I was always the other kid, not dumb, just average compared to my brother. At least that's what everyone thought. The day I overheard my parents deciding to give Jason's college fund to my cousin Brian instead of me was the day something inside me snapped. Not in a bad way, more like a switch flipped, and suddenly I saw everything differently. He would have been the one to succeed anyway. My dad said to my mom, not knowing I was standing in the hallway, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. Updated. So there I was, 17 years old, standing in our hallway in Oak Ridge, Iowa. Population? Who cares? Listening to my parents basically say I wasn't worth investing in. The $120,000 they'd saved for Jason's MIT education was going to my cousin Brian, the same cousin who once got so wasted at Thanksgiving he threw up in Grandma's antique gravy boat and blamed it on the dog. I didn't confront them. Didn't storm in screaming or crying. Something about hearing those words made me freeze up, but in a weird way, it also lit a fire under me. That night, I remember sitting in my room, staring at my laptop and thinking, I'll show them. All of them. See, I'd always been decent with computers. Not build a supercomputer in the garage, good like those kids you see on the news, but I could code pretty well. Jason had actually been the one who introduced me to programming when I was 12. He'd sit with me for hours, showing me how to build basic websites and games. It was our thing. After Jason died, coding became my escape. While my parents were lost in grief, barely noticing I existed, I'd stay up till 2 a.m. working on projects. Teaching myself languages Jason never got to learn. Python, Ruby, JavaScript, I devoured them all like they were episodes of a binge-worthy Netflix series. When graduation came around, my parents barely showed up emotionally. They clapped when my name was called, but their eyes had that vacant look, like they were seeing Jason's empty chair instead of me in my cap and gown. That summer, while Brian was blowing Jason's college fund on a cherry red Mustang and partying, at Lake Michigan, yeah, real academic investment there, Mom and Dad, I was working double shifts at the local Best Buy and applying for every tech scholarship I could find. I still remember the day I got the email about the Cyber Defense Scholarship. Full ride to their intensive 2-year program in Chicago. Not MIT, but a serious stepping stone. When I told my parents, my dad actually looked surprised, like he couldn't believe I'd managed to achieve anything without their help. That's nice, honey, my mom said, in that tone that really meant, that's cute, but it's not what Jason would have done. I moved to Chicago with exactly 2 suitcases and a burning determination that kept me warm through those freezing winters. My apartment was basically a closet with a toilet. All I could afford even working part-time at a coffee shop between classes. But man, those 2 years were transformative. I found my people, other coding nerds who didn't compare me to a ghost. My specialization became cybersecurity, focusing on financial systems protection. There were nights I'd be so exhausted I'd fall asleep with my face on my keyboard. Woke up once with QWERTY imprinted on my cheek, not my finest moment. But every time I thought about quitting, I'd remember my dad's voice. He would have been the one to succeed anyway. Meanwhile, cousin Brian dropped out of Northwestern after 3 semesters. Apparently, fraternity life and actually showing up for classes didn't mix well. My parents never mentioned it, and neither did I during our increasingly rare phone calls. After graduating, I landed a job at TechShield in San Francisco. Entry-level, but foot in the door, baby. My parents didn't come to my graduation. It's just too far, they said. Yeah, okay. Whatever. California was a whole different world from Iowa. People there didn't look at me like I was Jason's leftover sister. They saw me as me. Rebecca Chen, cybersecurity specialist with a knack for finding weaknesses in banking systems. 2 years at TechShield taught me more than I could have learned in a decade elsewhere. I worked directly under Sarah Keegan, an absolute legend in the industry. She became the mentor I needed, tough as nails but believed in me from day one. You've got that hunger, she told me once. That's something you can't teach. It was during a particularly nasty ransomware attack. On a client that I had my breakthrough. While the senior team was focused on the obvious entry points, I noticed something everyone else missed. A pattern in the code that revealed a completely different vulnerability the attackers had created for future use. My solution not only stopped the current attack but prevented what could have been a catastrophic second wave. Sarah pulled me into her office afterward. Instead of the pat on the back I expected, she looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You should be building your own thing. This is too good to waste on someone else's company." That conversation changed everything. 6 months later, at 23, I launched SecurePath with Sarah as my advisor and first investor. Our software specifically protected financial institutions from the kind of attack I'd identified, but with a predictive component that made it revolutionary. The first year was brutal. Ramen noodles for dinner, sleeping on an air mattress in our tiny office, pitching to investors who looked at me like I was a kid playing business. But the technology spoke for itself. By year 2, we had 3 major banks as clients and a waiting list growing longer by the day. Updated. So there I was, 24 years old and running a cybersecurity startup that was actually making noise in the industry. We'd moved from our janky little office in Soma to a legitimate space in the financial district. 20 employees and growing. I had an actual apartment with, get this, real furniture from Crate and Barrel. Not just stuff I'd found on the street during trash day. Pretty fancy, right? I hadn't been back to Oak Ridge in almost 3 years. Calls with my parents had dwindled to obligatory Christmas and birthday check-ins that always left me feeling emptier than before. They'd ask surface-level questions about my little computer job, but never really listened to the answers. They'd talk about Brian occasionally, how he was finding himself, working at my uncle's car dealership after burning through Jason's college fund with nothing to show for it. Then came the Weber investment. Mark Weber was this legendary tech investor who rarely backed early-stage companies anymore. Somehow, Sarah had managed to get us a meeting with him. I spent 2 weeks preparing, barely sleeping, running through every possible question he might ask. The meeting was at this ridiculously fancy restaurant in Palo Alto, where the water probably cost more than my entire grocery budget back in my ramen days. I was so nervous I could barely eat the fancy whatever it was on my plate. Mark was intimidating, that steely Silicon Valley gaze that seemed to be calculating your ROI potential with every word you spoke. Your encryption algorithm, he said halfway through lunch, cutting me off mid-pitch. It's different from anything I've seen. Who developed it? I took a deep breath. I did. He raised an eyebrow, that universal sign of, yeah, right, kid. So I pulled out my laptop right there between the appetizers and main course and walked him through the core architecture, explaining how I'd essentially flipped traditional encryption approaches to create something that could predict and adapt to new threats before they fully formed. The thing about truly innovative code is that it speaks for itself. By dessert, Mark wasn't just interested, he was all in. 2 weeks later, SecurePath secured $8 million in Series A funding. $8 million. The night we signed the paperwork, the team went out celebrating. There's this bar in SF called Cloudbreak that's basically tech industry central. Everyone was buying us drinks. Industry people I'd admired from afar were coming over to introduce themselves. It was surreal. Around midnight, Sarah clinked her glass. To Rebecca Chen, the most stubborn, brilliant person I know, the girl who refused to take no for an answer. It was like this perfect moment. Everything I'd worked for starting to pay off. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I ignored it. This was my night. Whatever it was could wait. It wasn't until I got back to my apartment, slightly tipsy and completely exhausted, that I checked my messages. 3 missed calls from my mom. That was unusual. We hadn't had an actual conversation in months. I called back, suddenly worried something bad had happened. Rebecca? My mom's voice sounded strange. We saw something today and, well, your father and I were wondering if that was really you. What are you talking about, Mom? There's this article. Someone from church shared it, about businesses. To watch? It has your picture. I sat down on my couch, the buzz from earlier completely gone. TechCrunch had just run a feature on 25 under 25 changing tech. Apparently, it had made its way to Oak Ridge. Yeah, that's me, I said, not knowing what else to add. The silence on the other end stretched uncomfortably. We didn't realize... Your company is worth millions? My mom's voice had that same tone from years ago, disbelief that I could accomplish anything significant. Currently valued at around $40 million after the latest round, I said, not bothering to hide the pride in my voice. Let them choke on that number. More silence, then my dad's voice. He must have grabbed the phone. Becca, that's impressive. Becca. He hadn't called me that since before Jason died. Thanks, I said flatly. We've been thinking maybe we should come visit you in California. See what you've built. Part of me wanted to tell them to shove it. Where were they when I was struggling? Through school? When I was living on cup noodles and working 2 jobs? When I needed someone, anyone, to believe in me? But another part, the part that still remembered what it was like to be a family before tragedy tore us apart, hesitated. I'm pretty busy right now, I said finally. Maybe around the holidays. That conversation left me rattled. I threw myself into work even harder, if that was possible. The next few months were a whirlwind, expanding the team, onboarding new clients, dealing with growing pains. Then came the Forbes feature. I knew they were doing a story on women in cybersecurity, but I had no idea they were putting me on the freaking cover. Sarah forwarded me the email with the subject line, "Holy shit, check this out." Very professional, Sarah. There I was on the digital cover of Forbes, arms crossed, standing in front of a wall of code, headline reading, "The New Face of Cybersecurity. How Rebecca Chen is Revolutionizing Financial Protection." The article detailed my journey, calling SecurePath potentially the most important financial security innovation of the decade. There was even a sidebar about how I developed my core algorithm during an all-night coding session fueled by nothing but Red Bull and a determination to prove everyone wrong. I printed a copy, not for my parents, for me, to remind myself how far I'd come. But of course, if TechCrunch had made it to Oak Ridge, Forbes definitely would. The calls started, coming the same day the issue went live. First my mom, then my dad, then even my aunt, all suddenly so proud of their Rebecca. I let most go to voicemail. But when my dad called for the third time, I picked up. "Becca," he started, his voice cracking slightly. We saw the magazine." "Yeah, it's pretty cool," I said, trying to sound casual while my heart was pounding. "I made a mistake," he said finally. The words I'd been waiting years to hear. "With Jason's money. With how we treated you." I sat in my office, looking out at the San Francisco skyline, silent tears streaming down my face. "We were so lost after Jason died," he continued. "We couldn't see anything clearly, including you, especially you." "Dad, no, let me finish. We thought Brian would be the one to carry on Jason's legacy. We were wrong. So wrong. It was you all along. You're so much like your brother. The same brilliance, the same determination. We just couldn't see it through our grief." Part of me wanted to scream that I wasn't like Jason. I was my own person who had succeeded on my own terms. But I understood what he was trying to say in his clumsy way. "I know it's probably too late," he said softly. "But we're so proud of you, Becca. So damn proud." I wiped away tears. "It's not too late, Dad. But things can't just go back to how they were before. Too much has happened. We know. We just want a chance to be part of your life again. To get to know the amazing woman you've become." 2 weeks later, they flew out to San Francisco. It was awkward at first. Years of distance don't disappear overnight. But as I showed them around the SecurePath office, introduced them to my team, I could see the genuine awe in their eyes. "You built all this," my mom kept saying, like she couldn't quite believe it. That night over dinner, my dad cleared his throat nervously. "We brought something for you," he said, sliding an envelope across the table. Inside was a check for $60,000, half of what would have been Jason's college fund. "It's not the full amount," my dad explained. "Brian, well, he spent most of it, but we've been saving to try to make it right." I looked at the check, then back at my parents' hopeful faces. They truly thought money could fix this. "I don't need this," I said, pushing the envelope back. "Keep it." Their faces fell. "But I do have an idea for it," I continued. Final update. 6 months after my parents' visit, we launched the Jason Chen Memorial Scholarship. Instead of just taking their money, I matched it and then some, creating a $500,000 fund for underprivileged students interested in STEM fields. The first ceremony was held in my hometown. My parents stood beside me as we awarded 5 scholarships to kids who reminded me so much of myself, brilliant but overlooked, hungry for a chance to prove themselves. "Jason would have loved this," my mom whispered as we watched the recipients take photos with their families. "I know," I said, and meant it. Despite everything, I never doubted that my brother would have been my biggest champion. My relationship with my parents isn't perfect. Some wounds run too deep to ever fully heal, but we're trying. They've joined the board of the scholarship. Foundation and helping other kids seems to be healing something in all of us. As for Brian, he finally got his act together after my uncle threatened to fire him. He's managing the dealership now, and we're civil at family gatherings. Sometimes I catch him looking at me with a mixture of regret and respect. I'm okay with that. SecurePath just closed our Series B at a $120 million valuation. We're expanding to Europe next year. Life is good, better than I ever imagined during those dark days in Iowa. The irony isn't lost on me that losing my family's faith was what pushed me to find my own path. Sometimes I wonder if I would have achieved all this if they had supported me from the beginning. But that's not a road worth traveling. What matters is that I believed in myself when no one else did. And now they believe in me too.